this is Editor's Take. I am Sakshi Batra and with me is Gaurav Choudhury. He's the Deputy Executive Editor of Moneycontrol, and we are going to be discussing about the mega bank merger that was announced by the government on Friday evening. Thanks a lot, Gaurav, for joining in. Now, 10 state-owned banks will be merged into 4. The government says that this move was required to strengthen the Indian banking system. And first up, for the benefit of all our viewers, if you could help us understand what are the major issues being faced by the banking industry right now, especially the PSU banks.
See, we will have to go back to 2016 when the Deed and Finance Minister FM Jaitley had said that it's about time that we actually brought down the number of banks. Instead of having 27 small banks, we should have about half a dozen large banks.
Right.
And the process actually started in 2018 when Bank of Baroda, Vijaya Bank and Dena Bank were amalgamated into one single entity. And the government would have drawn its lessons from there. To be fair to the government, that merger took place without too much of a disruption, both on the human resource side as well as on the customer side, which is more important. And having drawn lessons from that, the government has gone ahead and announced this reducing 10 banks into 4 banks by merging several of these banks into single entities. The merger process actually also started when State Bank of India, actually the associate banks of State Banks of India merged into State Bank, the parent State Bank of India.
Right.
And then we had the Bank of Baroda, Vijaya and Dena Bank merger, and now these banks. The whole problem, the point here is that the government is trying to come out and create banking entities which are owned by the government, which have a reasonably strong balance sheet, and which can, achieve economies of scale. If you have a stronger balance sheet, you can achieve economies of scale. But one criticism of the selection of these banks for the merger process is that these are weak banks, so-called weak banks. So when you are adding a weak bank to a weak bank, you are creating a larger weak bank.
Correct.
That is for time. To what extent that argument is going to hold, and whether it's going to affect. Whether the merger is going to yield desired benefits, given this argument, only time will tell. But at this point, the government believes that creating large banks, large public sector banks, is something that is absolutely required for achieving economies of scale.
Right. Now, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman also said that this move is also will act as a building block to achieve the $5 trillion economy target that the government has set for itself. So, how do the two connect really?
Yeah. So, we cannot we cannot become a $5 trillion economy unless the banking system supports this growth, and that growth that support by the banking system will come only if the credit flow keeps on continuing. And that credit flow can keep on continuing according to the argument in favor of merger of banks or creating large banks, is that you create a consolidated balance sheet which bolsters the bank's ability to lend across industries. And industries can grow only if there is credit available, and more credit will be available. That's so the argument goes, if you have large banks where they can deploy funds more efficiently across industries.
Absolutely. Let's also revisit the merger plan that the government has announced for all the viewers also. So the Oriental Bank of Commerce, a United Bank of India, will be merged into Punjab National Bank, which will become the second largest bank in India. Then Syndicate Bank has been merged with Canara Bank. Apart from this, Andhra Bank and Corporation Bank will be merged with Union Bank of India, and meanwhile, Allahabad Bank will be merged with Indian Bank. So how has the government decided this combination really?
So one of the key determinants of identifying these banks for the merger and the mix or the combination is the technology platform. The government has gone with the idea that if the technology platform is standard and uniform across the merged entities, that will cause the least disruption to customers. So government seems to have kept the customer's interest in mind while going ahead with identifying these banks for amalgamation. And there is also a bit of a regional characteristic that seems to be at play. There seems to be a little bit of geographical consideration that seems to have guided this combination selection of banks. Punjab National Bank going to be the lead bank, while some other banks are going to be merged into it. Punjab National Bank is a Delhi headquartered bank. It has a phenomenal presence in North India. Obviously, the merged entity will now have a far more wider footprint nationally than Punjab National Bank probably had. So I think those geographical considerations were also at play. But the primary determinant, as I said, was standardized tech backbone that were guiding the operations of these banks. And in all of these cases, the government has said the tech backbone is uniform or standardized. That is why it's not going to cause any disruption to customer operations.
Right. So how soon can we expect this amalgamation to take place, and what could be the challenges in implementation?
The amalgamation will start taking place only after the boards of these respective banks give the approval. And since all of these banks are public sector banks, and every public sector bank in India was created by an act of parliament,
right.
So at some point there has to be a parliamentary approval. It might be still a formality, but it has to go through a parliamentary ratification of some nature.
Okay.
Then the boards will have to approve, and then the merger process will start in all earnestness.
Absolutely. After this, I also want to understand what could be the procedural changes also for the customers of each of these banks.
So while customers will not face any problems in the day-to-day operations, some things will change. For instance, in an amalgamated entity, the IFSC codes will change.
Okay.
And so if somebody is involved or engaged or has a great degree of internet banking activity, or does a lot of transactions through NEFT or IMPS or RTGS, then the IFSC codes of the respective partners will change. That is an adjustment that the customers will have to make. Otherwise, the customers will also benefit that cross-bank ATM charges will just disappear, because among these banks customers, because they now become a single entity. So to that extent, and obviously the customers, anybody is using a checkbook of a certain bank, now they will have to use, once the amalgamation takes place, a new checkbook will be issued. So all those things will change. Those are adjustments that the customers will have to make. But these are in the case of the Bank of Baroda merger with, or the other two banks merger with Bank of Baroda, we have seen that has been carried out very seamlessly. I think the government would have told the banks to draw lessons from that merger and carry out these kind of changes as seamlessly as possible.
Right. So is there any impact going to be on the interest rate front also, because all of these banks have different rates for deposits and for lending?
Yeah, it's difficult to tell at this point in time, purely based on whether an amalgamation will lead to a change in interest rates that banks charge, and what would be the impact of these interest rates, assuming other things are equal. But logically, however, if a bank has more money because of the consolidated balance sheet, and if they suddenly have more cash to deploy, then they would rather bring down interest rates, because they have to deploy cash. Holding cash is a cost for banks.
Right.
So customers, ideally, other things remaining equal, could expect slightly lower interest rates from an amalgamated entity rather than a single bank.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, then, Gaurav, for sharing all that insight. Well, lower interest rates is something that definitely all the customers will look forward to. Apart from this, we'll just have to wait and watch out to see if there are any implementation challenges that these banks really have to go through. But apart from this, we can actually hope for better governance in all of these banks, as well as better operational efficiencies going forward after this merger. Thanks a lot for joining us in this edition of Editor's Take, and do stay logged on to moneycontrol.com for more news and updates. Thanks for watching.